Russia has arrested 11 people, including 4 gunmen, suspected of carrying out the attack at a crowded concert venue in Moscow. Russian President Vladimir Putin has accused Ukraine of preparing a window to help the suspects escape. Meanwhile, Kyiv has denied any kind of wrongdoing. However, there are questions being raised if Russia ignored US extremists' warning on the 7th of March. To talk more on this, we're now being joined by Dr. Gilbert Doctorow, international affairs expert, author and historian from Brussels. Thank you so much for taking our time and joining us here on WION.
My pleasure.
Now, Dr. Gilbert, this is indeed a difficult moment for the Russians in the aftermath of the attack. What is happening, in fact, at this point of time is that Putin in his address has clearly stated that the individuals who have been arrested are being probed and they were heading to Ukraine, while Ukraine says that it has no involvement in the latest attack. What exactly is happening on ground?
The information available is open to various interpretations. The United States line, which you have mentioned, is that there is no connection between Ukraine and the attack. To support that, they point to the claims by ISIS that they were responsible. They also cite the fact that they have warned the Russians in advance.
Right.
But the notion that these are exclusive causalities is wrong. They are completely complementary causalities. The ISIS organization, which is said to have been involved, ISIS-K as it's called, or Khorasan, they have every reason to have used Ukrainian support to succeed. The Financial Times tells us today that there were several attempts by this very same extremist organization to stage terrorist attacks in Western Europe, and they failed. That's understandable. They had no local partners to help them. In the case of Russia, they had a local partner. They were the Ukrainian intelligence operatives based in Russia, and there are many of them.
Right, Dr. Gilbert, you speak of how ISIS carried out the attack with the help of Ukrainians. Just a follow-up to that, why would ISIS attack Russia at this point of time?
For this particular organization of ISIS, it's said to be relatively unknown. And let's not take ISIS as a global organization, but as regional organizations. And this regional organization has very little renown. Staging a spectacular attack like this will give them great recruitment possibilities. So they, of course, were interested. As for the Tajik participants, we know that Tajik fighters have been in Ukraine fighting on their side against the Russians. Though I do it for the very same reason that the person who was interrogated yesterday and shown on Russian television, one of the 4 gunmen, was asked, why did you do this? And he said, for money. This was not jihadist. This was not a holy war in Russia. It was a purely commercial operation. And the amount they were paid was, of course, laughable. It was $5,000 in ruble equivalent. But the interest of these participants to make that money was clear. Several of them already were based in Moscow. One was a taxi driver. The ISIS organization was one factor. It succeeded in Russia, where it has failed in Western Europe because of Ukrainian assistance. The United States and Ukraine have done everything possible to distance themselves from what they were intimately implicated in. Now, the Western newspapers are saying that Mr. Putin says that they were heading for Ukraine. It's not what Mr. Putin says. It's where these people were caught. They were caught in Bryansk Oblast, which, if you look on the map, has 2 borders. One is with Belarus, and the other is with Ukraine. They were caught near the Ukrainian border. They were one of them was trapped in a car with which they were fleeing. 3 others went into the forest, and they were hoping to make their way across this ill-guarded border between Russia and Ukraine in that area. They were hoping to get into Ukraine. So this isn't what Mr. Putin says, it's what the facts tell us.
Dr. Gilbert, the instance that you're talking about here about Moscow, a prominent TV channel in Moscow interviewed a Ukrainian official, and he said that that Ukrainians carried out the attack for money, like you mentioned. it has been revealed that that video that you're talking about is actually fake. What do you have to say on that?
Oh, fake videos are common in the information wars between the West and other areas, including Russia. I don't think this has any particular significance. What counts, as I said, are the facts on the ground. Where the feet were pointed, they were pointed to the Ukrainian border, and that says enough. We'll see what the results of the interrogation will be. I think it was terrible for both the Ukrainians and the ISIS organization that these people were captured, because they're being interrogated intensively, and what they say in the days ahead may be very damaging for the story put out by Washington and Kyiv.
Right, Dr. Gilbert, now the latest attack also raises difficult issues for Putin amid growing international tension and mistrust, and also comes on the heels of Russian President Vladimir Putin cementing his grip on power. There are also issues and concerns as to how these armed gunmen entered a very prominent concert venue.
I think this is a valid point and definitely has to be investigated. The fact is that Russian successes on the ground in the war, the conventional war against Ukraine, have led in the last week or two to a certain hubris, to a certain overconfidence. The Russian successes have been very, very serious. The Ukrainians are withdrawing. They're being beaten badly in their counterattacks. They're losing 1,000 or more men a day. And knowing all this, because of maybe 15 or 20 minutes of evening news every day on Russian state television shows you their successes on the ground, that surely has led to a certain complacency among the security officials in Russia. This was not a state venue. It was a private venue. Crocus City Hall is a property of the Crocus organization.
Right.
They were remiss in having their security men only armed with billy clubs. They had no weapons to speak of, and they were apparently in their quarters. They were not guarding the entrance. So this was a terrible security breach. But it's not an isolated incident. I think that the Russians now are very rapidly addressing the question of their lax security everywhere.
Right, Dr. Gilbert, my last question. You talk to us about the impact of the terror attack in Moscow on the ongoing Ukraine-Russia war and perhaps the ramifications of it.
I think it's a bit early to make a prediction. It is entirely in keeping with Russian tradition that Mr. Putin declared a day of national mourning, and certainly nothing in this day of mourning will be said to indicate what Russia's next steps will be. But I think that this terrible, spectacular event was plotted with a knowledge of Mr. Putin's susceptibilities to move away from his restraint and to look to violent reaction. I think this was knowing Mr. Putin going back to his behavior in the Chechen wars, knowing the behavior of the Russians after the massacre and siege of a school in Beslan. The plotters could anticipate that Russia will react in a violent way against Ukraine for what has been perpetrated.
Right, Dr. Gilbert. Thank you so much for taking out time and joining us here on WION. Always a pleasure to have you here.
Thanks for the invitation.